A great leader gives you hope. They give you a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of inspiration. There's a connection. I think of the best leaders I've worked with, it's because there's a connection to their values, their ethical framework. Yeah, they treat you as a person. And I think the final part to that would be confidence. I think the inspiring leaders do that. So I think they give people that sense of hope. People connect with them. And then they give people confidence. They build that sense of confidence that, we're bigger than the mountain. We can do this. It's only just a little bit bigger. It's got to be a stretch. But I reckon we can do it. I think that's what they do.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I'm Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a 3-time Australian Olympic team chief psychologist, facilitator, and author of the best-selling book, Think One Team, and newly released Toolkit for Turbulence. He has a BA in psychology and a postgraduate diploma in psychology from the University of Adelaide, and is a registered psychologist at the Australian Psychologists Society. Our guest's careers included being the roles with the Olympic team, but also strategic alliance at PwC Consulting. He's partnered with Winter Jeffries Consulting. He's also a designer of Mindful Cricket and the founder of Think One Team. I have the privilege of introducing you to the founder of consultancy Think One Team. For 6 years, the lead designer for PwC's Consulting's high performance leadership teams, is someone who's passionate about building one team culture during turbulent times and loves the game of cricket. Graham Winter. Graham, welcome to the show.
Great, thank you very much.
Beautiful. You've done some amazing things over your time in both the sporting and also in the professional corporate world. I'm really curious, where did you grow up and what was the big dream, maybe when you were on the cricket field or playing in the playgrounds with your mates?
Grew up in Adelaide, the big dream was to play first class cricket. That was the thing as a kid that I was far more interested in than maths and science, to my dad's annoyance. And I just every moment I had a bat, a ball, I broke more windows than you could imagine. And that was very much the dream.
Was there any one player that you would emulate in the backyard? Was it a Sir Donald Bradman or was it someone else?
I used to play these games against the neighbour's brick wall. I had a cement wall that was part of the garage, and I would create scorecards, and I would play from the Australian side, and then I'd play from whatever the international team was as well. So, I guess because I was in South Australia, the Chappells, Greg and Ian were sort of very front of mind. And then I think a little later, Dennis Lilly, as I was sort of going into teenage years, and then sort of, ironically, fortunately, I ended up playing against them, which was quite amazing. And so I think, I guess, lots of just different players, because I'd spend my nights sort of sorting out the scorecard from the day against the wall and then go back and off I'd go again the next day. And I had these rubber balls that I worked out if you put them near the oven for a while, they didn't catch on fire. They came off the wall faster. Golf balls came off even very faster still, but they also broke a lot more windows. So a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the Chappers are still front of mind for many New Zealanders. But interesting. The other day, I was just looking for something in social media, and up popped this little kid who's 3 years old, South African kid, and watching him as a 3-year-old use just a stick and be able to put a ball over the fence into a swimming pool, and say, all right, I'm going to play this shot, and it's fascinating. So that ability from a very young age to visualize, playing a shot or emulating, as you were doing someone else, has quite a profound impact on your ability to perform as a human being. And in your role with the Olympic team, you would have done a lot of work around visualization. What can leaders learn from that in the corporate world?
It's an interesting one, though, and I think leaders naturally will visualize when they think about strategies and things like that. But I guess what you see in the sport area is that there's more routine, ritual. It's more built into the operating rhythm of individuals. So they think of themselves as high performers. They think are probably more about individual excellence. And therefore they're endeavoring to be at their best, sometimes for a moment or a set of moments. Business is a little more, it's probably more like a marathon. Yeah. So, but then having said that, I was just doing some jotting this morning. I've got a defence team that I'm working with at the moment, and they're in a really high demand environment because of some of the sort of strategic defence issues that are going on. And I mean, we're very much trying to treat that as we have a bunch of individual demands on these people. They're in a very high demand environment. They're having to move very quickly and respond to government and industry and geopolitical issues. They've got teams to build, they've got cultures to create. So we make sure for each of them, we try to get them to think of and treat them as we would an elite athlete. So incorporated into their routines are things like visualization, mindfulness, and so on. Because in many ways, many of the moments that they have, key conversations and so on, are no different to the key moments that an athlete would have in whether a team sport or an individual sport. So I think there's a place, but it's probably just not as embedded. It's not as natural, perhaps, in businesses as it is in sport.
Yeah, in some ways, is cricket a little bit like people that work in defence? Because, you're in a high-risk environment, in a way, when you've got a fast bowler coming at you. Yeah. You've got to be able to react and respond quickly. You can't hesitate. Hesitate, you lose, especially probably when you're younger, where people didn't wear helmets and you've got a bouncer coming at your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
But quite similar in a way, isn't it? Because you've got a long period of time, but there are moments. There are real key moments where if you're not switched on and aware, it could have consequences.
Absolutely. I think some of the more recent work on neuroscience that's gradually starting to make its way into the corporate world. I think our leaders and our teams are recognizing that when you go into these high demand environments, you face threats. And those threats are likely to degrade your focus, your decision making, your thinking, and you want to be at your best. Maybe not at your peak, but certainly in that better 20-25% of performance. And that's why I think I'm certainly seeing an upshot of that now. I mean, I've done work with probably the last 12 months with legal firms, with sort of defence clients, leaders in banks, in human services areas, and aged care. We've been engaged by in the last couple of years, by two sort of large aged care groups to work with their senior leaders on the individuals operating in these highly demanding environments where the sort of threats that come at them, and by threats I mean, you've got massive levels of complexity and uncertainty. You've got a high load, so a physical load and a cognitive emotional load. Workplace is a social environment, so there's always that sort of sense of wanting to, I guess, make sure that you're not feeling threatened by lack of importance or feeling like you're out of control, and that you're in an environment where things are out of control and you're navigating rather than, as a client said to me the other day, it's like whitewater canoeing. It's you're not actually controlling it, you're guiding it, but the water's moving you. And I think for all of those reasons, we're starting to see more attention now on the individual leader. And maybe just one final comment. I was just chatting to a lady yesterday. We're doing some work with an international team at the moment in an insurance business, and she runs people and culture for the international group, and this is one of the sort of divisions. And she was just saying, I've never seen a scenario in my career where leaders are now experiencing the sort of demands, challenges, and she said, I feel like most of them, many to most, are struggling. And I'm sure we can explore that as we go along. But I think you're right. It's, you could argue in cricket terms, the bowling's faster, it's more unpredictable, the crowds are bigger. Maybe the game's moving faster because it's a 2020. We need a bit of a different playbook to Test cricket, where you can kind of get out there and go, oh, tough time, just sit behind your bat for a little while and try not to get out. Can't do that if you've got 3 overs to go and 25 runs to score.
Yeah, isn't it? And it totally changes the way you play the game. I was just thinking about it too. If we think back just to 20 years ago, the pace of change in business was relatively slow. And so, for instance, your threats could be a competitor, but even then, there wasn't. It might be. It would take quite a bit of an effort for someone to actually set up a new store or build a new building or an office space. Whereas now I can literally sit on my lounge and I can disrupt your business in less than 12 hours. I can literally put something new out there and become the new Uber or the new Canvas or the new Zoom. And I can totally disrupt your industry just with a click of a finger. Yeah. And so you're starting to get these other aspects. And I think I was just talking on another interview we were doing earlier today, and there's so much more awareness out in the public now around different things like psychological safety and all these other areas that people wouldn't come up in the vernacular of a corporate world or even in a sporting environment or a family environment, that now adds to the complexity of what we're trying to do. So it's like the information there is more, it seems to be more information in different ways that can disrupt your business versus, say, the odd bank robber who could try and come in and come through your front door. There's a lot more ways to disrupt it now.
Oh, no question. More ways to disrupt your attention, more just ways to disrupt your business. I totally agree. I think there's no question the pace of change has occurred. I mean, you mentioned earlier with Professor Martin Bean, we released Toolkit for Turbulence just before Christmas. That was initially when we started putting that together, the intent was to say, well, let's look at the practices that we've used ourselves with working with Martin's teams and some others around dealing with the COVID, dealing with the pandemic. And then as part of it, we said, well, let's engage some other leaders. So we engaged 15 chief executives, or most of the chief executives from a pretty broad spread of Australian organisations, from the Grand Prix Corporation to the chief defence scientist to sort of head of Royal Melbourne Hospital and so on. And we purposely went out to all of these areas. And our first question really was, how have you dealt with the pandemic? But very quickly, what people started coming back to us was, well, look, the pandemic was really just the accelerator. What we're facing are supply chain issues, talent issues, technology issues. We've got all sorts of issues now around how our competitors are acting. We've got geopolitical risks. So suddenly, I suppose what we started to recognise was and this is what we call turbulence, was that there are so many elements of turbulence, and of course, because it's a complex environment, they all interplay. And the characteristic of complexity is that it's unpredictable. And yet we want certainty. So I think if there's something that perhaps, I think for your listeners, to see if you can separate in your own mind first, and then with the teams you're leading, the difference between clarity and certainty. Because in a complex environment, you cannot provide certainty. Things will change. They'll look good it's like the footy tips. I can try and do my footy tips now. Next Monday, when I look back, it'll look entirely obvious why those teams won or lost, but it doesn't now. And next Monday, I can have a theory and I can use it next week, but it won't work again, because in a complex environment, things move around. But you can provide clarity. And to me, clarity comes from clarity on what's our intent or our purpose. What are our values? So, great, somebody comes to disrupt your business, you'll still have a strong sense of your own personal ethical framework and values. You have a sense of what your area of expertise or passion or purpose is. So you're then like a yacht, you'll navigate around that, still heading to the destination. And then I think the challenge for leaders is to help their people to be more comfortable with the uncertainty while providing that clarity. And that's a hell of a challenge. But I think that is why also, as you're saying, a lot of the leadership stuff hasn't changed. The context has. So how do I do that in this context as opposed to, same with cricket, the basics are there. But oh boy, it's different when it's going faster and there's more decisions to be made and so on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if we look at cricket, the way decisions are being made, we've now got, videos, multiple video cameras. We've got more umpires than we've ever had before, and which throws even a different way of thinking into the game. So there's a different set of circumstances involved, and there's more money involved now. So there's a lot more things at play, even just in a simple game of cricket, as well.
Yeah, I think and it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, we probably shouldn't try and stretch the cricket metaphors too far. But I mean, you think about the bats that the players have got now. You get far more value for your shot, and you could argue the same thing applies in business. That as you said, you can sit in your lounge room and target a global market and be in that market this afternoon.
Yeah.
And even like 12 months ago, but I still got to write all this stuff. Well, now, I mean, there's a couple of AI platforms that'll do all that for you. Spotify will give you a frame, give you a shop. There's I think the potential is there to do so much, but then of course that then brings this interesting human challenge that one of our really key characteristics when we're performing well is our focus. And arguably, I've often been asked, from an Olympic team perspective, what's the single most important thing? Focus. If an athlete can bring focus into their event, well, they know how to perform. They'll be able to do it. But if they can't bring focus, nothing else will work. And I think the same applies from a business perspective. There's so many opportunities. There's so many things going on. I don't know how many times I'm told by leaders, we need to get better at prioritizing. Unfortunately, sometimes that just means rearranging their order of things rather than, prioritization is a choice of doing some things and not other things, even though you might be sequencing them. So I think there's some interesting, things we could explore in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that kind of resonated really fast was when you're talking about focus, right? So what do athletes do? They focus. And what we know and we would have seen is that it's really easy to say yes when there is no focus, when there is no clarity. You just say yes to everything because you don't know where you're going. And I think for me, 3 key things that I learned as an athlete and coach and from the sporting world was when you have absolute clarity on what your outcome is. So say it's, I'm going to win a gold medal and then you're able to, so the clarity is I'm going to win a gold medal in the 1500 meter swimming at the 2032 Olympics in Brisbane. Super clear. Like anyone can understand that, and you've got absolute clarity on that. But then the ability to visualize. Now I can see myself standing up on top of the podium, on the top pedestal or on the top part of the podium, with a gold medal being put around my neck by someone from the International Olympic Committee. I can now visualize that.
Yes.
And now because I'm focused on that, it's easy to prioritize and say yes or no to things. First say yes or no, but then start to make priorities around what needs to be done first so I can achieve that. And we see a lot in corporates where they might have clarity on where they're going, but they're not very good at visualizing for the people that are coming along the journey with them, what that outcome actually looks like. So they can say, yes, we're going to achieve this, but in their mind, they can't see it. It's like having a 3-year-old kid who keeps doing something wrong, and they come up to you and you articulate to them, okay, well, this is what you need to do. And they go, yes, and they run off and do the same thing. It's because they can't see it. They haven't seen what it is. And I feel that's an important part of change that people are starting to get better at, but it's still one of the key missing things. Even if they've got clarity, there's their ability not to be able to visualize for themselves and other people what that actually looks like?
It's that creating the compelling, rather than just the, that sort of compelling picture, that compelling vision. One of the one that we've been using a lot more. I guess we're just doing a lot more face-to-face work now than we were probably 12 months ago, and we use these quite large AO posters. And one of the ones that we've got is we call it the narrative canvas. And the narrative canvas we use with executive teams mostly to help them to create their story around. I was doing that a couple of weeks ago with a group that does a lot of sort of social housing and a variety of those areas. That was around their strategy. But she got one on this coming Monday, where the executive team of a large government agency that looks after mining and energy. So the exec have been working with me and their transformation head on that narrative. And the narrative is a story of where we've been, what our backstory is, what our purpose is, what the challenges are that we're facing, what the quest is, what the possibilities and the opportunities are, and what their ask is of their leaders to join them. And then our next phase is to work with them. So we've all got a shared story. And that's exactly what you're describing there, that I think when people think of athletes, they think, oh, they must just sit and visualize the gold medal. Well, they might visualize that, but they'll visualize an awful lot of the process that goes behind that, the feelings, the challenges. They'll visualize how they respond to setbacks. They will script it out. Now, I'm not suggesting the narrative scripts it out per se, but what the narrative does is, in some ways, if you use almost like the McKinsey model of Horizon 1, 2, 3, what the narrative does is say, yeah, this is who we are. This is like Horizon 1. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is where we come from. We have a history and a legacy and a capability and a possibility here, and we have a purpose. But here's the challenges. Here's the world we're facing. It's like a big chasm, and in that chasm, there's uncertainty, and we can't guarantee you success. It's going to be tough, and it's going to be challenging. But there's also some opportunities in there as well. And we know it feels difficult for you, but here are the three things that we would ask you to sort of embrace as we go forward. And if I think of the three that I've got with one of our clients at the moment, it's let's provide clarity. We as leaders, let's provide clarity to our people, what our possibilities are. The second is let's connect and collaborate. Let's make sure that what we do is as a recent podcast of yours, you were talking about collective intelligence. Let's connect up. And then the third one is let's recognize that we can make a difference. And if we do that, here's what our possibility is. We can shift this, the social housing group. We can make a fundamental difference to this community, to the mining and energy group. We can actually accelerate the decarbonisation of our economy and get some of the costs down around energy, and also set up for a more sustainable future from an economic and a social perspective. So we can actually create our own legacy. So it's creating that story. And I think what you do find is a lot of business leaders are good at the logical, they're good at the credible, but they don't do the compelling.
Yeah.
And I think it's creating that story. And I was finding we're doing quite a lot of that at the moment, so that leaders, firstly, it's just the leadership team uniting themselves around the story, because they're often not clear on what it is. And then it's that ability to bring others into their story. And then how do we make that your story? And maybe sort of final comment on that, I think William Bridges, who's got, I think, a great framework on change called Transitions. He talks about go to one of your people and ask these 4 questions. Do they know what's the purpose? What's our purpose? Yeah. What's the picture? Where do you think we're heading? What's exciting? What's the plan? You've got a sense of what our plan is and what's your part. And I reckon those 4 things, if people purpose, picture, plan, part, that's a brilliant little framework to be able to sort of go and test with your people. And that's what, if I'm working with a CEO and an executive team, that's what you're accountable for, that those people know what that is, because you are setting them up to play their part in the overall organization. And that's what leadership's about. Mobilizing people to maybe do some things they wouldn't ordinarily have done. And let's do something purposeful while we're doing it.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm gonna come back to focus, because sometimes this can be the detriment of an athlete as well, and it can be a detriment of a leader. We become so narrowly focused that we separate from, and we kind of remove in a way things that are around us that we need. One may support us. So we sometimes see with athletes that they even push their their closest loved ones away because they are so intent around one specific purpose.
Yep.
And we see that in the corporate space as well. It happens. They just become so focused. But also they miss the blinkers come in.
Yeah.
And so the peripheral vision is not there. So how do we ensure that we have real clarity of focus and that we have that discipline of focus without putting the blinkers on?
Yep. Well, I think in simple terms, I think it's the horizon 1, 2, 3. Don't get too concerned about the second horizon. In other words, don't get too locked into your plan, your focus, but keep a broader perspective. And I suppose in some ways the word I would use with most execs I work with is perspective. Yeah, sometimes they will be like athletes, become too obsessed, and they'll be too narrow in their focus. And as you say, like in a football game, that's concussion hitting your way if you get too narrowly focused. But equally, you can't be too broad either. And I think it's every sort of environment has, and I don't want to get too technical about it, but every environment has its attention requirements, if you like. But I think from a business perspective, it's that metaphor to get on the balcony, because you're on the stage a lot and you're doing a lot. And when you're on the stage, it's very hard to know what's going on in the audience and what's going on with the lighting and so on. But if you're the leader, you've got to get up on the balcony. And sometimes if that's in a negotiation, it's getting up and looking at, what does this look like from a third party's perspective? Or if it's a business planning exercise, it's, where are we? Or, I was working by the energy companies in Melbourne on a Tuesday, and we had a group of 60 people. And one of the things that came out from them was this sense of, we probably don't go back enough to, are we actually working on the right problem here? Have we lost sight of what our purpose was? Because you're in a changeable environment. So I think it's perspective. The metaphor I use a lot with exec teams is, we've got a fleet of yachts. We need to be clear on what our overall destination is. We have a set of sort of guidelines, ground rules around safety and communication and so on. We've got to be accountable for our own yacht. We've also got to be able to communicate with each other, and we're going to be zipping and navigating as we go. And it's the ability to, in a sense, operate on water, if you like. So it's fluid, but it's also then the ability to be able to be sharply focused within that. And it's a skill set. I find for, particularly some of the leaders we're working with in government, they're not used to operating in more ambiguous environments. So beginning some of that conversation about, what's your relationship with ambiguity? How do you feel when things start to feel a little out of control? You want to bring them back in, but maybe we just need to hold the tension for a little while, keep it open. We need to do a bit more discovery, a bit more design before we really lock in on this. So I think focus has got so many dimensions to it, but I think again, I think for your listeners, the one I'd ask is, when you know you're under pressure, where does your sense of perspective come from? Are you able to step back? Do you have people around you who will help you to do that? Exactly as you've said, that sense of an athlete, gets distant from their coach or their mentor or their advisor or their teammates, they lose perspective. And that's when you're at risk of missing things. And that obviously has a variety of costs depending on the environment that you're in.
Yeah. We see a lot in many sports where they probably spend 95% of their time planning, preparing, training to perform, and then maybe less than 5% of their time performing. I mean, the difference could be cricket now. I think cricketers tend to be performing a lot more than they're training sometimes, and baseball would be quite similar, I would imagine. But in most cases, it's kind of that way. And defense would be very similar, where they put so much time into that preparation, planning, etc. before they do. But a lot of times in corporate, we may flip that. We're trying to perform 95% of the time, and maybe 5% of the time we get on that balcony, we're doing that planning and preparedness, even just for meetings for today. That shift, I think, is critical now, in a sense where there is a lot more complexity, that we do need to be able to step back from trying to perform so we can see the bigger picture, what's going on, and be able to assess it, but do it in a way that's fast, because we don't have a long period of time. So that requires a new skill set, like the fundamentals of leadership there. The way we use those
exactly.
skills is a new skill set. What tools or what strategies have you seen work well that have allowed people to stop being so much in the performing space and really be able to step out into that planning, preparedness, training kind of space to ensure that they're doing the right thing?
Probably a couple of things. I think the first thing is to recognize the nature of the challenges that you're facing. That if they're technical challenges, if they're linear challenges, then there's a pathway. You step your way through it. But if you're facing more complex, more adaptive challenges where you've kind of got to learn and experiment and test, then we need to have a different way of dealing with those. I created this sort of framework probably, well, I'm not sure, maybe a dozen years ago now. And anyone that's had a knee reconstruction won't like the acronym, but it's ACL. And ACL is Align, Collaborate, Learn. And it came from, when I was working with PwC, I wrote a book called High Performance Leadership, and we did a series of interviews with all sorts of organizations that had what we call small, fast teams. So it was like special military. So we sort of spoke to the heads of special military in Australia, performing arts, first responders, sport, agile business teams, emergency medicine. And what we observed was that every one of those had this cycle of alignment, collaboration, learning, and go again. So it was like a loop. It's like if you think of like almost like one of those fidget spinners, align, collaborate, learn, align, collaborate, learn. We use that. So what I do with the team is we build what we call a canvas. So in Toolkit for Turbulence, we have a whole section which says, so think about your alignment around your direction and your focus. Yeah, as a team, do we have a clear purpose? Yeah, if we're partnering with someone, do we clear on what our expectations are? Then in collaborate, it's around connection. So do we have a level of trust? And then do we have synergy around our decision-making and our problem solving? And then the learn is then around our tempo and our debriefing. The one thing, Craig, that I think more than anything else stood out for me when we did that research was that every one of those environments other than business has a natural pause, which gives them the opportunity to do the learn. So the align, the collaborate, the learn is the debrief. It's the post-incident. If you're in emergency medicine, it's the post-mission. You can still do the action debrief within a military. In sport, obviously, you've got your halftime break and your end break and so on. So I think if you're thinking of a tool, I'd be encouraging your leaders to think about their teams in terms of, are we aligned? Are we collaborating? How do we learn? Because if you think of each of those, alignment's about commitment. Collaboration is about co-creation and sharing. And then learning is about adapting. So it's like, how do we commit? How do we then co-create? And then how do we adapt? Where does that come from? And it can usually come from good debriefing, but you've got to be able to do that in a fast-paced way. So almost like the fourth piece of that puzzle is, I've got the alignment, the collaboration, learning, but what's the spin cycle? And sport, a competition gives you the spin cycle. But in business, I think often for leaders, and I've often said to teams, the most important thing for us to work on now is your operating rhythm. Because if the danger is if we don't build in good, strong ability to learn as we move and to adapt, then we're in trouble. But corporates often don't do it because they will avoid the difficult conversation, or there'll be gaps between the silos or whatever. So that's a lot of our work, is building those align, collaborate, learn loops. And I think most people find that quite a nice, simple go, I can see that. And it applies differently. I'll use some other examples, but I think that hopefully gives you a clarity to what that means.
Yeah, the tight feedback loops are a critical thing. We see it, in sport and performing, musicians, or we might see it in dance, etc., where they've got a coach there, or where they're testing, trialing, etc. all the time. We see it in the military, and it is such a critical role. I mean, we facilitate as teams in the work that I do.
Yeah.
And so we always have a back channel where we are giving ourselves feedback during the actual program, before, during, afterwards. And there's a really, really tight feedback around the way we approach it, and allows us to be high performing. And the facilitators that we use, just when we first started doing it, were like, this is amazing. Yeah. And because normally they're on their own. And the feedback they might get is from a client. Oh, you were amazing. That was awesome. Yeah. Which is all kind of cheerleading a lot of the time. And you might get
at the end.
And I didn't like the food.
Yeah. So coffee wasn't so good. That's the
so you generally don't get the real feedback that allows you to learn and grow. And so how do you create those kind of nurturing nurturing environments where you can have those tight feedback loops where people can learn based on, as you say, I like the ACL acronym there. I think it works really, really well. So good takeaway for people watching.
Yeah, can I just add to what you're saying there? I mean, I think part of the answer to how do you create that environment is the leader goes first by asking for insights and then demonstrating how they take their insights on their own impact. Yeah. So that's what's one thing that I could do differently or better to make this a better experience for the team? What's one thing I could do differently or better to open up our conversation channel? So I think that if the leader can set up that expectation that I want to learn, I want to be open, that's the stepping stone. And the really important thing, Craig, you mentioned is you didn't say you're debriefing the task, you're debriefing the dynamics, you're debriefing the communication. And that's actually what we need to do. Unfortunately, when I think most corporates I see, if they debrief, they'll debrief the project, if you like, but they do it after the event. And they'll just, and it's almost like debriefing the scoreboard in a football game. It's like, scoreboard's what happened. Debrief the goal, play the video back. What happened? Who created space? Who created the opportunity? That's what we want to reproduce under pressure. And that's the interesting challenge for leaders. So I quite often sit in with my clients on their exec meetings and we do 5-minute pauses. And I encourage them I'll provide a bit of it, but I encourage them to become good observers. So they'll get up on the balcony and go, what's going on in this team? What's unspoken at the moment? Yeah, do you really think everybody's on board with that decision we just made a few minutes ago? And people are going, no, I don't think so. Go, okay, so there's evidence and the signals here, but we're not using them. So I think it's getting used to creating that sort of psychologically safe environment, which probably, I think psychological safety is actually not a good term. It's a very badly named concept, but the basic concept is, do I feel psychologically confident? Do I feel socially confident in this situation? To say what I'm feeling, and within the context of values and so on, and that's what happens in good teams. They'll go, nah, I don't think we're signed up here. I don't think we're committed, and that's what you need to hear, because executive teams, how many times I said they've made the decision, they haven't made the decision. They've just closed off the level of anxiety in the meeting, and down the track they're going to get an impasse because someone's not going to have the resources they need. Someone's not going to provide the information. They are not going to fly in formation to execute. So to me, that's a really important piece of, with Martin Bean, with Toolkit for Turbulence, we have this thing called closing the gate. We knew when we were working with RMIT, they had a $300 million hole in their budget as a consequence of COVID. And that is a massive issue for people, for students, for the whole sort of operating model of the university. And in order to execute that, we knew that there were 2 or 3 major risks. One was they wouldn't tackle it. They would just avoid it in some way, shape or form. The second was that they might actually, they might accept it, but then not go and execute it. And the third was they were going to feel very isolated and go, oh God, now it's my job to go and do it. And what we wanted to do is make sure as we closed each of the gates, we got people through, that we knew we had an ACL, we had alignment, we had commitment to that collaboration, and we knew how we were going to learn so that we would execute that, and it minimize the risk of those things falling over. And to me, that's what good executive teams, leadership teams do on their most important issues.
Yeah, it just took me back to something I was doing in international school in Taiwan. And it was interesting because I had one of the principals walk in one day and saw us doing this, 30-minute swimming lesson with 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
3-4-year-olds. And they sit there like, you've only taught for 5 minutes of this lesson. And I said, no, I haven't. I said, I've only spoken for 5 minutes of this lesson. Yeah. But watch what's going on here. And I said, you can learn this. And I'll share with you what we did. It just kind of refreshed my mind, where to teach the kids diving, obviously there had to be a bit of context beforehand and a bit of content from us showing them what was done. But once they were going, what we would do is put them in 3s. So one would be the student, one would be the coach, and one would be an observer. And this is at 3 years old we were doing this.
Yeah.
For upwards. Yeah. And so literally what you got is the coach would teach the student around how do they stand and where do they put their hands when they dive in, because it's a relatively simple skill.
Yeah.
And then the observer would then observe how it was being coached. And you can do it from a very young age. Yeah. And so it made me think when you were talking about stopping executive meeting and having someone come up from onto the balcony to kind of going, okay, what's going on here? And it just made me think around, this could be a great way from a succession planning point of view. So it's not always the CEO that stands up and does the standing on the balcony. You might choose someone else, to choose different people each meeting to go, all right, today you're the observer.
Yeah.
And so I want you every 5 minutes, every half an hour, I want you to stand up on the balcony and I want you to give us an oversight of what you're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Give us the read of the temperature in the room, so to speak. And I think it's a really clever way to build succession, because a lot of leadership is what we see and what we feel and what we observe versus what we may hear and say. And a lot of the time it's missed. So I think that it just could be a good opportunity that's just coming to my head right now for people out there to kind of consider, how do they do succession from a leadership point of view, but also start building those feedback loops that are so important.
I think it's a great idea, because implicit in what you're saying is the biggest risk for most teams is status. So it's what often referred to as the HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion. Once that gets delivered, most other people will then start to fall into play. Because we know from we talked about neuroscience earlier, status is the biggest inhibitor of intention. So higher status, I'm likely to kind of be more guarded and so on. What you've described, on the other hand, is saying, no, we're going to take status out of this. And then you provide the guidance. So, for example, some of the teams we've got, when we're going through work on site safety and accountability, we talk about three simple habits. If I'm running a meeting, set the tone, invite participation, facilitate constructively. And what we then do is we pair people up, and throughout their interchanges over usually a 2 to 3 week period, and then we mix them around, they get feedback from each other. How did I set the tone? How did I invite participation? How did I facilitate constructively? In the space of 2 or 3 weeks, you can completely change the tone of workplace conversations if you've got clarity about, well, what tone do we want to set? What do we mean by inviting participation? And particularly for organizations that tend to be more technical and more hierarchical, that can be an incredibly powerful way. And then for what the example you've just described is the person simply saying, the tone I'm picking up in the meeting at the moment is, I think there's a good level of optimism, but I get the sense that people are a little sort of shy of trying to close it out at the moment. Participation, 3 or 4 people I can see you've almost gone to speak, but you haven't. Is there something that you're missing out on? And then facilitating constructively. Are we moving towards solving the problem? Are we moving towards an outcome? So I think it's having, the debriefing, as you would with the diving, it needs to have some just a small number of habits that you can then provide feedback on.
Yep.
And I think sometimes, again, we make it too complicated.
100%.
Yeah.
And you would have, it's interesting. A lot of people talk to me and they go, okay, you must have done a lot of motivating when you were coaching your international athletes. And I went, no, they didn't need any motivation. Sometimes I needed to pull back the motivation. It was too much.
Yep.
I said most of the time was just releasing the handbrake for them, figuring out how to release a handbrake and keeping it really simple, because they wanted to know more and they were always seeking more information. Not all of them, but a lot of them would seek more information. It was about trying to reduce the noise and the complexity to keep things simple.
Yeah.
And, even, yes, we might be in a more complex corporate world than we've potentially ever been, but it's about how do you simplify and come back to what is required in this moment and remove the unnecessary things that, maybe could help, but are not really serving you right now, so that people can really focus and make decisions easier, because there is a simple way of doing it. So, and I think that's the biggest role of a leader, is to simplify the complexity.
Yeah, so your comment about motivation. Oh God, how many times I've said that over the years. Post the Sydney Olympics, you can imagine I'm chief psych for the Olympic team in Sydney, so you kind of got a reasonable profile. And I don't know how many, can you come along and motivate our people? And I go, the one thing an Olympic athlete does not need is motivation. I have not the foggiest idea to motivate people. Got a pretty fair idea what to do with people who are motivated, but as you say, they're overloading themselves and so on. I reckon in there, Craig, one thing is getting leadership teams more clear about what their purpose and their role is.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes leadership teams, their role is impression management. You come to a meeting and you just need to make a good impression and not get into trouble and look like you're doing okay. The role of the leadership team is to unlock potential in the organization and unblock. If I'm debriefing an executive team, I'm saying, give me some specific examples of how you have unblocked this organization. What are the top 5 or 6 things you're working on that you know you have to deliver across the organization to be successful in the next sort of 30, 60, 90 days? Okay, great. Craig's accountable for that. We know that. But like any good team, we're now going to challenge and support him. Craig, where are you blocked? Where do you need... where do you feel that you have a risk? Where do you feel things aren't going as quickly? You go, don't feel like I'm getting the IT support that I need to be able to get the implementation up quickly enough, or marketing are kind of dragging the chain a bit. Okay, let's unblock that for you to get you to be successful. On the other hand, we go, mate, I think you're going a bit slow on this. I think you're spinning the wheels. I wonder whether we're going around trying to make the same decision 3 times. There's no more data available. Time to make the call. So to me, that's what a good exec team or good leadership team is doing, is they're thinking about how do we unlock and unblock, as opposed to how do we report what progress is. And that's what, you think about what a coaching group does in a sports team. That's exactly what they're doing. They're up there. We got to announce that potential? Where are we blocked? Exactly as you've said. So I think again is, well, what's the purpose of this team? And our data shows 70% of the leadership teams we work with do not have a clear and effective purpose. I know it sounds ridiculous, but give them a Post-it note each, write it up, put it on the whiteboard. What's the purpose of the team? It will not say the same thing.
Yep.
It'll say also run the business, deliver for shareholders. That's not your purpose. It might be the purpose of the organization. What's this team's purpose?
Yep.
Untap, unlock, unblock. That's what your job is. So I think that's a really interesting, and I think it does come exactly back to your point about their job's not to be the cheerleaders. Their job's not to just do their business unit. Their job is to, it's the classic definition of management from the 1920s. It's the allocation of scarce resources and the optimization of those resources. That's it. It's just that we call it leadership now because you very rightly said in your podcast recently, management was maybe about when we dealt with livestock and things like that. It's about people. And people, we need some more subtlety in how to do that.
Yeah. I love this conversation. We're going into some great areas here. They're unlocking, unblocking, untapping potential and things like that, I think is so crucial. And it's a simple way of looking at things. And, that is your role. It's not to get too caught up in the day-to-day, anything like that. You've got to ensure that everything can flow in as smooth as possible. Now, I recently talked about, is harmony the handbrake to high performance?
Yeah.
Or high performing teams, I should say.
Yeah.
And, it definitely creates discussion because a lot of people are like, no, we want harmony. Or like, well, okay, tell me why we have a whole lot of wars happening around the world. Tell me why these things are happening. And they're like, okay, but we want harmony. We want people all kind of, in synchrony and in harmonious, etc. And I said, like in harmony, like an orchestra. Yeah. And I'm like, well, just think an orchestra is very, very, very different to harmony in a corporate team because you have a very set of notes, very defined rules and game, whatever you're playing at, it's very defined. But I said, you're all asking for diversity in organizations. Yeah, we want diversity. And I said, well, if you get harmony, you remove diversity.
Yeah.
You start to remove diversity because people start to keep the peace, they compromise, and then you end up with issues long term. So it might help you in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at it from, we need unity, but we need to keep diversity in an environment where people feel like they are safe to be themselves. And so if we can provide that, then you're on the right path. But if you focus on harmony, you'll get disappointed. If you want people to grow, express, be themselves, be happy, be happy in what they are doing, then we need to look at it that way. And it was really interesting to see some of the responses from people.
I wonder
have you seen something similar? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A question I've been asked a few times since the book came out was, in the next 2 or 3 years, what do you think's the single most important thing that executive teams are looking for their next level of leaders? And my answer is very clear. It's the ability to deal with conflict.
Correct.
The conflict that comes from uncertainty. So that might be conflicting priorities. It might be the gaps between business units, the lack of connection. It might be absolute sort of hit up conflict. But it's the ability to deal with conflict constructively. Because as you say, false harmony is no use to anybody. We need to have a way of, but it's a chap called Adam Kahane, Kahne, wrote a book. I think it was called Tackling Tough Problems or worse to that effect. But it's a story worth telling. Adam was a scenario facilitator for Shell in South Africa in the late 80s, early 90s, and he was engaged to facilitate a number of the activities that the de Klerk government put in place around the dismantlement of apartheid in South Africa. And his book tells the story of bringing people together who, in some cases, their families have been killed by associates of people who are in the room. And in amongst this, he talks about how they managed to create conversation. And in the middle of the book is this amazing line where he just says, in the absence of dialogue, force will prevail. And I think that is so true, that in the absence of dialogue in an organization, in the absence of the skills, the ability, and the environment to have the intellectual friction, if you like, to raise the concerns and have those somewhat difficult conversations, but to do it respectfully, in the absence of those, then force will prevail. So therefore, whoever's got the biggest budget, whoever's got the biggest status, whoever's got somebody on the board that they can, so you end up with side games. So I'm a firm believer that as a CEO I've worked with for many years, sort of says to me, Graham, the quality of the decision will be a function of the quality of the debate. We must have good quality debates. And I think, again, the role of the leader is, and we just talked about earlier, Craig, that observer is what's not being said here. You look at some of the case studies on Boeing. I mean, I think they've done a good job, but they've still got more to do around some of the elements in their culture where they believe that some of the safety issues have been a function of engineers not feeling that it's a confident, safe place to speak up and call out some of their concerns. So, this can have massive repercussions. So, I totally agree with you. I think harmony sometimes is just the absence of what's needed to deal with some of the underlying tensions that are there. They're still there, but let's deal with them.
Yeah. I was fortunate to be part of a sports team that has a New Zealand record for the longest unbeaten streak in field hockey of 272 games. It's 16 years. They lost one game in 21 years. A phenomenal feat that I don't know if anyone's done any better around the world. I mean, I know individually, Jahinga Khan, the squash player, I think 555, but as a sports team, most people don't even get near 100.
Wouldn't be too many.
And they're talked about as being incredible, high-performing dynasties type thing. And, as part of that, the biggest thing there around, because people said, they must have all got along really well and there would have been no conflict. And I said, no, there was probably more conflict in there than any other team I've ever been in. But what they did well is they addressed conflict or addressed opposing views or whatever it may be very quickly and openly, because they knew that if it festered long for a period of time, that it would affect the outcome of the team. It would have an impact on the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. Now, we weren't trying to achieve 272 games unbeaten. that was never in our mindsets.
Yeah.
But our purpose was to improve. It was always to how can we take the game to a new level.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about beating. It actually wasn't about beating the other team. It was, yes, I mean, we're very competitive people. Don't get me wrong. But for us, it was more about how do we advance the game? How do we keep taking it to another level that no one's ever been? And the All Blacks used to be like this.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was why people go, oh, they're always 5 years ahead. Well, yeah, it's because their focus is more around how do we change the game
Yeah.
for the good of the game. And I think that when you've got real clarity on what your purpose is, and people get a real sense of that, and then you can build that. And to be quite honest, I reckon alcohol was probably, to be quite honest, back then was probably the avenue that allowed for a lot of these conversations to happen, because people freed up.
Right. Okay.
They got a bit of Dutch courage, so to speak.
Yeah.
and may have been the beginning of how a lot of these conversations occurred, and then it flowed on into the dressing room or during the game, etc., where I don't know, there just must have been a level of permission built up from the leaders of the team at that time to do that. And probably the other big thing of that team was there was a captain who was recognized, but there were always 5 key leaders on the field at any one time. And every person playing in that group was either at the time or has since been extremely successful leaders in their own right.
Yep.
But they knew when to be followers.
Yes.
And so they knew their role in that team of when to follow and when to lead.
Yeah.
And that was one of probably those two were probably the most phenomenal things that allowed that team to be what it was.
It's interesting, isn't it, that leader, that sort of multiple leaders within a team. Yeah, Rick Charlesworth was the Australian women's hockey coach in Sydney. He went in without a captain, because the argument was, I don't want people to be looking to somebody else to make the decision.
Yeah.
I interviewed the head of the Australian SAS at one point and said, so who leads in this particular mission? And I remember him sort of looking at me as military types did and said, well, if I'm in the helicopter, I actually like the pilot to be in charge. If I jump out, then whoever hits the ground first, they're in charge. Somebody busts their leg, the doc takes over. I said, I'm getting the point. But yeah, and I think the same thing. I look across the best exec teams I've worked with, and you can usually go, there are 3 or 4 or 5 people who take the CEO position. We're working with, a while ago now, they won't mind me saying, Newmont Mining, and the CEO saying to me, yeah, I want my mine managers to run their mines as if they're the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
And they did, I think they did a really good job of it, because yes, there was plenty of to and froing, but it was done respectfully. It was done with a clear sense of values around how those conversations happen. But I think sometimes teams don't have, I don't know, so many leadership team meetings are so sort of set play, everybody sits around the table. I get tables taken out of the room. I get them to sit I do a fishbowl, put 4 of them in the middle, pick one issue that they're working on. Say, how confident are you going to deliver this, and where are the risks? And let the 4 people have a conversation, let the rest of them listen. And then get the ones on the outside to play back what they heard. Do you feel confident? What supports this person? Are they holding back? Are they using the team? So we really try and debrief, get used to a different dynamic, or get up and use Post-it notes, get up and use whiteboards, or devote the entire meeting to one issue that we're going to interrogate. And as one of my clients says, we're not going to just wrestle this thing to the ground. We're going to kill it, because it just keeps coming back. And he runs one of the sort of big defense companies, and they have so many complex issues. But yeah, that ability to go, we as a team are going to take this on exactly as your hockey team would have. Heaven help whoever the competition is, because they're going to get swarmed. And that's what you, in a sense, want around your major issues, that people huddle and swarm around those as a good team does. And that's the ACL, that's the align, collaborate, learn happening. We're aligning, we're collaborating, we're learning, and you're seeing this happening all around the organization. That's what if I'm trying to build a one team organization, that's what that is. It's not, everybody sort of sitting around, loving each other. It's like, oh no, this is the ability of a team with a shared purpose to be able to do what needed to do in that particular area as a team. And a team is any more than one person at any given moment connecting with somebody else.
Yeah, it's reminds me of L'Oreal. L'Oreal have headquarters in France, where they have a room called the confrontation room. Now, confrontation in Australia would mean I'm going to smack you in the face. Nearly. It's kind of fisticuff confrontation. Whereas for them, it's debate. And so literally, if you're like a leader of a region or an area, Then you go into this middle of this pit, so to speak. Then you have a layer around you. Then you have another layer. So pretty much what you're speaking there.
Yeah.
And literally you share the idea or you share the project or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then everyone around it will then bring different kind of viewpoints, or they'll different lenses to it. Lenses is probably the biggest one here. And then from there, then they've got people observing as well. So it's a very similar approach.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it's fascinating because we get caught up so much around, and this is where I think psychological safety hasn't quite gotten to yet in the corporate world in many countries, is actually getting to that space where how do we shift it from having a fight with our hands to actually being a debate for purpose.
Yeah, and it's giving people some tools to be able to do that, and some practice to be able to do it. I mean, you think about it now, there would be, I don't know, how many people listening who are going to be going to a management team meeting at some stage. They'll be sitting around a table. They will be following an agenda. But what if they broke that up? What if they said, okay, let's approach it in the way that we've just talked about. Let's just take one issue and let's absolutely nail it. And we found that the aged care group that I was mentioning, when they were right in the middle of their most difficult and challenging experiences, we really honed in on just making sure that they got some wins on a small number of things. And it built that sense of confidence. It built that sense that, God, every time we do something, there's a Royal Commission, there's the talent, the workforce problem, there's another medical emergency, there's another lockdown, there's the funding issue. So they were reaching that point of, like, we can't control anything. Well, yes, you can. You just do, you just use the most powerful psychological tool that's ever been invented, the short-term goal. Pick a short-term goal, work on it together, nail it. You talk to the CEO now, he'd say, the thing that got us out of that was we actually started being successful again because we chose some things to work on together. So I just challenge you, your listeners to go, just stop bringing people into management meetings and reporting on what they're doing. Bring their problems in and work on them and unblock them. That's got massive potential. We don't do it very well. Well, the good ones do it really well, but
yeah, of course.
It's a little uncomfortable. But show me something, as you well know, in high performance. Hey, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If it's not a bit of stretch, then you're not growing.
100%. Look, I feel like we just got started, but
we've gone quickly, haven't we?
We're going to have to wrap this up shortly. We all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions.
Yeah.
When was the last time you did something for the first time?
I decided a few weeks back that I used to sailboard, and I hadn't sailboarded for a while, and I saw these people wing surfing. So wing surfing is when you get about a 4 or 6 meter inflatable sail and a board of some sort. So I, as you do, got online, spoke to some people at a place up in Queensland, said, how would I do that? And they said, well, you'd need X. So I bought myself a wing surfer, and I've now got myself to the point, I'm not foiling yet, but I've got myself to the point where in 20 knot winds I can wing surf. And I face planted plenty of times, but it's seriously cool. I would totally recommend it. That was, but oh God, the first session, like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. Yeah, like,
and of course, like a baby again, right?
Yeah, and of course, a whole bunch of kids and parents sort of arrive just as you're starting. You just go off and off and off and off. No, yeah. But now, no, I can. Yeah, it's really cool. I thoroughly recommend it.
Outstanding. I love that one. What is the one question that you would love to solve?
This is a really interesting one, isn't it? Well, the one question I'd like to solve. Can I take almost the counterintuitive view and say, I would love the leaders I work with to recognize that the problems they're facing don't have right or wrong solutions, that they've got to navigate their way through them. They've got to find, best balance, best trade-off, that it's not the perfect solution. So I think it's almost that you can't solve this. Your role is to move through it. It's almost the Simon Sinek talks about it with a just cause. It's you'll never get there. But you can move towards it. So I think it would be getting people more comfortable with not solving the problem totally, but moving their way through it and making progress.
It's like buying a house. You can never buy the perfect house.
Exactly. Yeah.
For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who has been a great example of this for you?
I think, to me, a great leader gives you hope. They give you a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of inspiration. There's a connection. I think of the best leaders I've worked with, it's because there's a connection to their values, their ethical framework. Yeah, they treat you as a person. And I think the final part to that would be confidence. I think the inspiring leaders do that. So I think they give people that sense of hope. People connect with them, and then they give people confidence. They build that sense of confidence that we're bigger than the mountain. We can do this. It's only just a little bit bigger. It's got to be a stretch, but I reckon we can do it. I think that's what they do. And I think the person I think to me represents that would actually be my co-author of Toolkit for Turbulence, Martin Bean. Martin was the Vice Chancellor at RMIT for 5 years. He was the head of the Global University, or Open University in the UK for 5 years. He was an executive with Microsoft. But he's one of the most extraordinary people I've ever come across. He has a significant physical disability. He had severe scoliosis as a child. His experience going through that is extraordinary. And maybe I was running a session with Defence Science Technology Group recently, and a person came up to me and said, "Your co-author, Martin Bean." So I was at RMIT for 10 years. I never met Martin, but he's one of the best chief executives I've ever seen. And I thought, isn't that amazing? I mean, there was 10, 11,000 people, 80,000 students. But I think Martin had that ability, and he still does, to inject hope, to build connection. He just has this superpower. He just makes people feel that they're really important, and he just builds confidence in you. So I think I would Martin's the best, or one of the best 2 or 3 CEOs I've ever worked with, and he's the prototype for me.
Good. Well,
can I add one to that? And my old cricket coach, Chester Bennett, who passed away many years ago, coached the Chappells and various others. He was exactly the same. He would saunter up alongside you, very quietly suggest that you had possibilities here. He would build confidence in you and out you would go. And he's just a very gentle leader, very much like Martin. No yelling, no histrionics. But so I think it's that, humility. Was it Jim Collins? High humility, fierce resolve. Yeah. Sorry, Craig, interrupted.
No, it's good. Well, lucky for the listeners, in a couple of weeks, you'll also get to hear from Martin Bean. So we will have a conversation with him as well. So, which is great. So thank you
that'll
for
be brilliant. He is quite an outstanding human being.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, this has been a special conversation. I really enjoyed it. How can people learn more about what you do? What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Connecting is pretty simple. thinkoneteam.com. That's the website. I guess my 2 books that are out and about, you possibly find them in airports and so on. Toolkit for Turbulence was authored with Martin. Came out just late last year and is doing really well. And then Think One Team, which has been a bestseller for 14 years or something now. Wiley's have just released it as a 3rd edition, so that's got a nice bright new cover as well. So they can certainly, some of the tools we've talked about are in both of those books as well. But thinkoneteam.com is the easy way to make contact.
Graham, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Fascinated by your insights of you growing up with the passion of cricket and playing against many hypothetical players in your backyard, to then being able to play against some of those as well. Was quite an experience, I'm sure, that still remains vivid in your memory, to working with some of the world's best ever athletes and with the Australian Olympic team, and some of those insights and how you've brought that into other spheres of life, whether that be in military, whether that be in the corporate world, and I'm sure in other areas as well. But to share things like the ACR, and we were talking about earlier around that align, collaborate and learn, and creating those tight feedback loops, and how we can apply that to executive teams or even to any teams inside an organization. But I think one of the bigger takeaways could be for people to think about how can you unblock and unlock people, and or teams to be able to perform at their best, to be able to remove that handbrake and allow them to really excel as who they are and how they can be. And, really opening up for people to think about how can we debate stuff and use, what might feel really uncomfortable in that confrontation to actually use that as a way to move forward quickly and openly rather than to sit back and let it fester and shift to more of a negative viewpoint, which will distort you and everyone else to how can we be more positive and optimistic and utilize those opportunities as learning when things may get a little bit difficult. So everyone out there, maybe make sure you check out the toolkit for Turbulence that Graham has produced there with Martin Bean. But Graham, a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I look forward to continue this conversation further in the future and maybe catching up sometime when I'm in your neck of the woods.
Fantastic. Thanks, Craig. I think we have so many things in common. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you for being an exceptional interviewer.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.